Hi, this is Frank Spillers with Global Horizons, and this is Frankly Speaking. In the last Frankly Speaking, we talked about a person's sense of well-being and how an issue gets disruptive. I'm going to talk about wicked issues this time. Wicked issues are, as I said before, those issues that have a high emotion with them. There's many different ways we can address or solve those issues, but the outcome of solving those issues is extremely important. Things like immigration, healthcare, financial security, the person's sense of well-being, making ends meet. Is there enough food to feed people in your community? Those issues of how that we address those as a community or as a society are very important. Today, I want to talk about how to address those issues and why it's important those issues get addressed. If you think of a graph and you have two different axes like this, you have an axis here of number of choices, a perceived number of choices an individual has. And you have the axis down here and it runs along here of this is an emerging issue, this is an issue, and this is a very disruptive issue here at the end. And so the more choices an individual has and the more up this side of the graph the individual has, then it's just an emerging issue. If you give people a lot of choices or a say in the matter, it's a less disruptive issue. The more choices you take away and the more choices that people don't have, they don't have a say in the matter, then the more disruptive an issue becomes. Now, on the inverse side of that, think about this. If you have time here and you have the disruptive emerging issue here and the disruptive issue over here, the cost of resolving those issues, if it's an emerging, it's a lower cost. But the more disruptive that issue is, the higher the cost it is to resolve that issue. Let me give you an example. I was once working in a town, a small community of about 1,200 people. It had a fire one year in the forest that was around it, and it had a flash flood 2 years later. And so they had some natural disasters in there, but the flash flood in those 2 years wiped out a lot of their civic infrastructure, some parks. They spent 2 years building a 9-hole golf course, and it was set to open that Saturday, and the flood happened that Friday night and wiped out half of the golf course that the volunteers spent years planning and building of their own sweat equity that they put into that. It's a great town. But so I was sent out as part of the flood mitigation team, and I asked a whole bunch of people. We were going to have a community meeting, and I had 300 people sitting in the school auditorium in front of me. And I asked them this question. I said, if we could rebuild your community in any way, what would you want to have happen? You could have heard a pin drop. That's what was happening. Nobody would talk to each other. Nobody would look at each other. Nobody would interact or engage in what was going on. It was like pulling, I don't know, mud out of your tires or something like that. Really hard. I couldn't pull information out of them. But so after a couple hours of just not really going any place with this community, I said, okay, everybody go home. I'll be back in 2 weeks and we'll continue the conversation. And so they went home, and in the meantime, in that 2-week period, I went to the state historian and I asked him, and I said, tell me about this community. And he said, Frank, I understand this community and I know exactly what's going on. I said, tell me. And he said, 100 years ago. I said, excuse me, what? He said, 100 years ago, they gave an award to the neighbor that hated their neighbor the most. Let that sink in for a moment. So in other words, here we are, New Year's Eve. We're having fun. We're over at our neighbor's house and saying Happy New Year. And then we wake up the next day and we say, I'm going to win that award this year. I'm going to hate my neighbor more than anybody else can hate their neighbor in this town. And so I'm going to compete with it. And so they had this competition of who can hate their neighbor the most. And it might have been a fun competition, but over the years, what they really did is build a culture of hate within that community. And it was passed on from generation to generation. And I don't know how long they gave that award for. It could have just been happening for a couple of years. But when I went back into that community and I got the 300 people back into the school auditorium again, I told them that story, and you could just see the changes on their face of what happened. And they would look around saying, I was wondering why I couldn't play with you, or Grandpa would never go down your street, or Dad never did like you. It's because they built a culture of hate within their community. But they didn't know why nobody would engage. They didn't know why people would not engage in there, and all issues were disruptive. The cost of resolving issues was so high. It was 100 years of growth in that community because they didn't solve the issue. So issues and culture are passed down from generation to generation based upon the experiences and our experiences that we give to others. It's passed down to the generation. So you have to look at your community, you have to look at your business. Are we open to new ideas? Are we open to new people? Are we open to we might seem to think we are, but really are we? You know, you'll have people that live in a community for 20, 25 years, but they weren't born and raised there. Ask them if they feel really welcome within there, or when was a time they didn't feel welcome. Many people tell me, I'm still not a part of this community. We have to start building cultures to where people engage in our business and in our communities. This is Frank Spillers. This has been Frankly Speaking.